Kicked out at 15, an orphan inherits a dusty, forgotten trading post. What he found inside would change not just his future, but the entire story of his past. This is a story about what home really means. And if you've ever felt lost, or like you were starting over with nothing, I hope you'll subscribe and stick around, because this community is for people who get it. The bus station smelled of disinfectant and despair, a combination I knew better than my own name. For 3 years, since my last foster placement imploded, that smell had been the official scent of my life. It was the smell of moving on, which was the system's polite way of saying you were being moved out. But this time was different. This time I wasn't being moved. I was just out, 18 years old, a man, according to the state, a duffel bag with 2 changes of clothes, a worn-out paperback, and a toothbrush, according to the world. In my pocket was an envelope that felt heavier than the bag. Inside it, a bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of, and a single, strange-looking iron key, my entire inheritance. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a tired, buzzing sound that vibrated in my teeth. I watched people come and go, families hugging, students with headphones, businessmen with briefcases. They all had a destination that was more than just a dot on a map. They were going home, or to a job, or on a vacation. I was going to a place called Red Rock, Arizona, to claim a property I didn't want, left to me by a grandfather I barely remembered. His name was Silas. That's all I knew, Silas. It sounded like a name from a book, not a person. My caseworker, Mr. Henderson, had given me the envelope that morning in his beige office that always smelled faintly of stale coffee. He'd cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes, the way adults did when they were delivering news they considered both good and bad. "Leo," he'd said, sliding the thick manila envelope across his desk, "your probationary period in the group home is over. You're 18, emancipated." He said the word like it was a prize. It felt like a sentence. "As you know," he continued, tapping a pile of papers, "we were contacted by a law firm in Arizona. It seems your maternal grandfather, Silas Blackwood, passed away 6 weeks ago." I just stared at him. I had a grandfather? My mother, from what little I'd been told, had died when I was a baby. Her parents, I was informed, weren't in the picture. Another dead end in a life full of them. "He left you something in his will," Henderson said, his voice softening a little. "It's a property, a business of sorts, an old trading post." He paused, letting that sink in. A trading post. I pictured a log cabin selling cheap souvenirs to tourists. It sounded like a joke. "There are complications," he added, and the professional mask was back. "Significant tax arrears, a foreclosure notice. But he was insistent it go to you. It's all in the legal summary there." He'd pointed to the thickest sheaf of papers in the envelope. The bus to Red Rock was scheduled for noon. It was my only option. The state wasn't kicking me out onto the street, not technically. They were sending me to my inheritance. It was a clean, tidy solution for them. My file could be stamped closed. Another kid processed and released into the wild. I pulled the key from my pocket. It was heavy, black iron, with an ornate, almost floral head and a long, simple shaft. It looked like it belonged to a castle, not a dusty shop in the desert. It felt ancient and important, a ridiculous contrast to the flimsy bus ticket and the $20 bill Henderson had given me for travel expenses. I closed my hand around it, the cold metal pressing into my palm. For 3 years, since I was 15, I'd been adrift. Not just in the system, but inside myself. You learn to make yourself small, to expect nothing, to build your walls so high that no one can ever reach you, but you can't get out either. You learn that hope is a dangerous thing. It's the gap in your armor that always gets you hurt. And yet, holding that key, a sliver of something that wasn't quite hope, but was adjacent to it, wedged itself into a crack in my defenses. A question. Why? Why leave me, a stranger, a derelict property drowning in debt? Why this key? The automated announcer called my bus number, the voice garbled and tinny. It was time to go. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder, the strap digging into my collarbone. I walked towards the gate, just another face in the crowd. But for the first time in a long, long time, I was walking towards something that was mine, even if it was just a pile of debt and dust. It was a start, or another ending. I wasn't sure which. The meeting with the lawyer had been the day before I left. It was a video call, my face pale and grainy on Mr. Henderson's computer screen, hers sharp and professional from an office that looked like it was made of dark wood and important books. Her name was Evelyn Albright. She looked to be in her late 50s, with sharp eyes that seemed to see more than I was comfortable with, and hair pulled back in a severe bun. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice crisp, "I was your grandfather's attorney for the last 20 years. I'm the executor of his estate. As you've been informed, you are his sole heir." I just nodded, feeling like a child in a principal's office. "The estate," she continued, "consists of one asset, Blackwood's Trading Post, located at the junction of Highway 89 and Canyon Road, 12 miles outside of Red Rock. The property includes the main building and 2 acres of land." It sounded substantial. I felt a flicker of that dangerous hope again. She extinguished it immediately. "The property also comes with liabilities, specifically 3 years of unpaid property taxes totaling $34,712. A final notice has been issued. The county will seize the property and auction it in 90 days if the debt is not settled. $34,000. It might as well have been $1 million. I felt the air leave my lungs. So this was the punchline. A cruel joke from a dead man. "Furthermore," she went on, her tone unchanging, "I have received a formal offer for the land from a corporation called Apex Land Development. They are offering to purchase the property as is, which would involve them settling the tax debt directly with the county. Their offer is $40,000. She paused. I did the math in my head. 40,000 minus the 34,700. That left just over $5,000. The net proceeds to you, after the tax lien is cleared, would be $5,288, she confirmed, as if reading my thoughts. "It is my legal recommendation that you accept this offer. It's a clean break. It gives you a small amount of capital to start your new life." A new life, for $5,000. It was more money than I'd ever had in my life, but it felt like an insult. Selling off the only thing anyone in my family had ever given me for the price of a used car. Why? The word came out before I could stop it. It was barely a whisper. Why would he do this? Leave me a bill for $34,000. Ms. Albright's expression softened for the first time. The hard lines around her mouth eased. "I don't know, Leo. Silas was a very private man. He wasn't easy. When your mother left, he changed. He cut himself off from the world. But he was very clear about one thing. He said if anything ever happened to him, everything was to go to you, no one else." She looked down at her desk for a moment. "He also left you a box. Personal effects. It's waiting for you at my office in Red Rock." The key Mr. Henderson has for you opens that box. So the key wasn't for the trading post. It was for a box, another layer to the mystery. The offer from Apex expires in 30 days, she concluded, her professional tone returning. You don't have to decide now. The bus ticket was your grandfather's arrangement. He wanted you to see the place for yourself before you made a choice. Go to Red Rock, pick up the box, see the property. Then you can decide. The call ended. Henderson had looked at me with a sort of pity. $5 grand is a good start, kid. Don't be proud. Take the money. Pride. That was a luxury I couldn't afford. He didn't understand. It wasn't about pride. It was about the crushing, familiar feeling of being worthless. My own grandfather had valued my existence at $5,288, and the only way to get it was to sell the only piece of him I had left. Now, on the bus, the memory of that conversation felt like a stone in my gut. The city skyline gave way to suburbs, then to endless stretches of highway. The green, damp landscape of the Pacific Northwest slowly bled out, replaced by the pale yellows and dusty browns of the high desert. I watched the world change through the grimy window, feeling like a ghost moving through it. I was going to a place I didn't belong, to make a decision that felt like it had already been made for me. Take the money. It was the smart thing to do, the only thing to do. But then I would just be Leo Vance, aged-out foster kid with $5,000 in his pocket. And then what? How long would that last? A few months in a cheap apartment? And then back to the smell of disinfectant and despair. The trading post, as hopeless as it sounded, was something else. It was a place, a name, a connection. It was a story I didn't know the ending to. And as the bus hurtled south, deeper and deeper into the vast, empty heart of the country, I knew, with a certainty that scared me, that I had to see it. I had to walk through it. I had to understand the joke, or the puzzle, or the final, desperate message from a man I'd never known. The bus ride was 22 hours of recycled air and the low hum of the engine. I slept in fits, my head against the vibrating window, dreaming of empty rooms and locked doors. When I was awake, I stared out at the landscape. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. The sky was huge and unforgivingly blue. The land was a canvas of reds and oranges, vast plains punctuated by monumental rock formations that looked like ancient sleeping giants. It was beautiful and terrifying. It made me feel incredibly small, a tiny speck of a person moving through a place that didn't care if I existed or not. A familiar feeling. Red Rock wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. The bus pulled into a gravel lot next to a gas station that also served as the local grocery store and post office. The sign on the front read, Red Rock Mercantile, population 412. I stepped off the bus and the heat hit me like a physical blow. It was a dry, baking heat that seemed to suck the moisture right out of your skin. The air smelled of dust, gasoline, and something else, something spicy and wild, like sun-baked herbs. I stood there for a moment in the gravel lot, my duffel bag feeling impossibly heavy. This was it, the end of the line. I went inside the mercantile. The air conditioning was a blessing. An old man with a face like a dried apple sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He glanced up at me over his glasses. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I'm looking for the law office of Evelyn Albright," I said. He grunted. "Next door, the one with the green door. She's expecting you?" "I think so. My name's Leo Vance." His eyes sharpened with a flicker of recognition. "Silas's boy," he said. It wasn't a question. "Heard you were coming." News traveled fast in a town of 412. "Welcome to Red Rock, I guess." He went back to his paper. It wasn't an unkind dismissal, just a statement of fact. I was here. The world kept turning. I walked out of the mercantile and over to the building with the green door. "Albright Law," it said in faded gold letters on the glass. I took a deep breath and went inside. The office was just as I'd pictured it from the video call. Cool, dark, and quiet. The smell of old paper and lemon polish hung in the air. Ms. Albright was sitting behind a large wooden desk, exactly as she had been on the screen. She looked up as I entered, and her face held the same professional neutrality. "Mr. Vance, you made it." "Leo," I said quietly. "Please." She gave a small, tight nod. "Leo, please, have a seat." The chair was leather and sighed as I sat down. It was the nicest chair I had ever sat in. "I have the box for you," she said, pulling a heavy-looking dark wood box from under her desk. It was about the size of a shoebox, but it looked solid, ancient. It had a large, ornate iron lock on the front. "This is the key," I said, pulling the iron key from my pocket and placing it on her desk. She nodded. "Silas was fond of old things. He said modern locks had no character." She pushed the box across the desk toward me. "It's yours, everything inside." For a moment, I just stared at it. This was it, the inheritance. Not the trading post, not the debt. This box. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the key and fitted it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying, heavy clunk. I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a photograph, a faded black and white picture of a young woman with a wild smile and dark hair, holding a baby. My mother and me. I'd never seen a picture of her before. My heart felt like it seized in my chest. Beneath the photo was a small, leather-bound journal, a compass, and a folded, yellowed map. There were no bundles of cash, no secret documents, just these few, intensely personal items. A lifetime of questions flooded my mind. Who was she? What was she like? Why was there only this one photo? I felt Ms. Albright's eyes on me. I carefully closed the lid of the box, not wanting her to see the tears welling in my eyes. Not here. "The trading post is 12 miles north of town," she said, her voice gentle. "There's no bus. I can give you the number for a local man, Jim, who runs a sort of unofficial taxi service. Or you can wait. The Apex offer is still on the table. You could sign the papers today. I can wire the money to an account for you, and you could be on the next bus out of here tomorrow morning." The easy way out. The smart choice. $5,000 and a clean break. But I was looking at the box in my lap. It was the first tangible piece of my own history I had ever held. My mother's smile. My grandfather's journal. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't an insult. It was something else. "I need to see it," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need the number for that taxi." Ms. Albright studied my face for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly and reached for a notepad. "His name is Jim. Tell him Evelyn sent you. He'll give you a fair price." As I stood to leave, clutching the box to my chest, she said one more thing. "Leo, your grandfather, he wasn't a simple man. Don't assume the story you see on the surface is the whole story." It was a warning and a promise, and it was enough. Jim was a man in his 60s with a kind, weathered face and a pickup truck that looked like it had been held together with rust and sheer force of will. He charged me $20 for the ride, which was the 20 Henderson had given me. It felt fitting. My last tie to the system, spent on the last leg of the journey. "So you're Silas's grandkid," he said, as the truck bounced along the cracked asphalt of the highway. The town disappeared in the rearview mirror almost instantly. He was a good man, quiet, kept to himself the last couple decades. "I didn't really know him," I said, staring out the window at the endless red rock landscape. "Yeah, I gathered that," Jim said. "He was real broken up after your mom. Well, after she left. Never was the same." He didn't press. The rest of the ride was quiet, the only sound, the rattling of the truck and the wind whistling through the open windows. After about 20 minutes, he slowed down and pointed. "There she is." I followed his gaze. Set back from the road, at the mouth of a small, dusty canyon, was a long, low building with a faded sign that I could just make out. Blackwood's Trading Post. My first thought was that Miss Albright had been kind. It wasn't just derelict. It was a ruin. The paint was almost completely peeled off the wooden siding, revealing sun-bleached gray wood underneath. Part of the porch roof had collapsed, the timbers resting at a sad, broken angle. The windows were boarded up or shattered. A thick layer of red dust covered everything, making it look like it was slowly being reclaimed by the desert itself. It looked like a place where things ended. "She's seen better days," Jim said, stating the obvious. He pulled the truck to a stop in what was once a gravel parking lot, now mostly overgrown with tough, scrubby weeds. "This is as far as I go. You sure you want to be out here? There's nothing for miles." "I'm sure," I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. I got out of the truck, my duffel bag in one hand, the wooden box in the other. "How do I get back to town?" "You got a phone?" I shook my head. "No service out here anyway," he said. "Tell you what, I'll swing by tomorrow afternoon. If you're standing out front, I'll pick you up. If not, I'll figure you found a way to make it work." It was a kind offer, an escape hatch. I thanked him, and he gave me a short nod, then maneuvered the old truck back onto the highway and drove away, leaving me alone in a cloud of dust and silence. The silence was the first thing I truly noticed. It wasn't just quiet. It was a deep, profound emptiness of sound. No traffic, no humming lights, no distant sirens. Just the whisper of the wind moving through the canyon and the skittering of some unseen lizard in the brush. It was unnerving. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the building. My inheritance. It was worse than I could have imagined. A monument to failure and neglect. My grandfather's failure, my family's failure, and now, my failure. I walked slowly up the creaking steps of the porch, avoiding the collapsed section. The front door was thick, solid wood, with a heavy iron handle, but no visible lock. It was barred from the inside. I walked the perimeter of the building. Most of the windows were boarded up tight, but around the back, one of the smaller windows had been broken, the glass long gone, the plywood covering warped and pulled away from the frame. It was just big enough to squeeze through. I tossed my duffel bag and the box inside, then hoisted myself up and through the opening, dropping down into the darkness. The air inside was thick and stale, heavy with the smell of dust, dry rot, and the faint, musky scent of desert creatures that had made this place their home. Sunlight filtered in through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, cutting bright, dusty stripes through the gloom. I was in what looked like a small storage room. Empty shelves lined the walls, coated in a blanket of dust. I made my way through a doorway and into the main room of the trading post. It was a huge, open space. A long wooden counter ran the length of one wall, a vintage cash register still sitting on it like a metal tombstone. The shelves that lined the other walls were mostly empty, though a few sad-looking artifacts remained. A piece of pottery, a faded woven blanket, a row of empty glass bottles. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, a silent, swirling galaxy of decay. It was a sad, forgotten place. But it was also magnificent. The ceiling was high, with heavy, exposed wooden beams. A massive stone fireplace stood against the back wall, big enough to stand in. Despite the dust and the damage, I could feel the history of the place. I could almost hear the echoes of voices. Imagine the shelves laden with goods, people haggling over prices, travelers stopping in for supplies on their way to somewhere else. It had been alive once. I spent the next few hours just exploring, moving from room to room like a ghost. There was a small kitchen in the back, the appliances ancient and coated in grime. A set of stairs led up to a small apartment on the second floor. A single bedroom, a small living area, a bathroom. This must have been where he lived. It was spare, almost monastic. A simple bed frame, a wooden table and chair, a bookshelf. The books were mostly histories of the area, geology textbooks, and old paperback westerns. I ran my hand along the dusty tabletop. This was where he ate. This was where he slept. This was where he died. The thought sent a chill through me despite the heat. I felt like an intruder, a trespasser in his lonely world. Downstairs again, I examined the main room more closely. Behind the long sales counter, there was a door. It was made of reinforced steel with a heavy, industrial-looking deadbolt. And it was locked. There was no keyhole on this side. I pushed on it, but it didn't budge. It was like trying to move a mountain. A locked room. A steel door. My grandfather, Ms. Albright had said, was a private man. What was he keeping in here? Or keeping out? My eyes scanned the room, looking for anything, any clue. And then I saw it. On the floor behind the counter, almost hidden in the shadows, were a series of scratch marks on the old wooden planks. They weren't random. They formed a pattern. A perfect square, about 3 feet by 3 feet. A trap door. My heart started to beat faster. I knelt down, my fingers tracing the lines. There was no handle, no ring to pull. How did it open? I pushed on the edges, tried to pry it up with my fingers, but it was sealed tight. I sat back on my heels, frustrated. I looked around the room again, my gaze falling on the massive stone fireplace. The stones were irregular, a mosaic of desert rock. Except for one. Near the bottom, to the right of the hearth, was a single stone that was perfectly smooth, almost polished, and a slightly different color from the rest. It looked out of place. I walked over to it and pressed. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan of rusted metal and shifting stone, the smooth rock depressed into the wall. And across the room, with a loud thunk, I heard the sound of a heavy bolt retracting. The trap door hadn't flown open. The hidden bolt had just unlocked it. I had to go back and pry at the edges with the tire iron I found in the back room, the metal screaming against the wood. Finally, with a shuddering groan, the heavy door lifted. It revealed a set of steep, narrow wooden steps leading down into absolute blackness. The air that rose up to meet me was different. It was cool and dry, with the clean, earthy smell of deep stone and old paper. It didn't smell like decay, it smelled like preservation. There was no light switch. I remembered the compass from the box, and the small, waterproof match case that had been tucked beside it. My grandfather was an old-fashioned man. I fumbled with the matches, my hands shaking slightly. The first one scraped and died. The second one flared to life, a tiny, brave star in the oppressive darkness. I cupped it with my hand and started down the stairs. The match burned down to my fingertips, and I dropped it, lighting another. The steps ended on a packed earth floor. I was in a small, stone-walled cellar. It was maybe 10 feet square. Against the far wall was a simple wooden table and a chair. On the table sat a kerosene lamp and a metal box. Not a shoebox this time. A military-style ammunition can, painted black. The match went out, plunging me back into darkness. I felt my way to the table, my hands finding the cool glass of the lamp. I remembered seeing them in old movies. I fumbled with the knob, lifted the glass, and lit the wick with my third match. A warm, golden light filled the cellar, pushing the shadows into the corners. The room was sparse. Shelves lined one wall, neatly stacked with canned goods, jugs of water, and medical supplies. A survival bunker. My grandfather wasn't just a shopkeeper. He was a prepper. He was prepared for the end of the world. My attention was drawn back to the ammo can on the table. It wasn't locked. I lifted the heavy latch and opened it. My breath caught in my throat. It was full of money. Bundles of cash, neatly wrapped in paper bands. 50s and hundreds. I reached in and pulled out a stack. The paper band was marked with a number. $5,000. I counted the bundles. There were 7 of them. $35,000. Almost the exact amount of the tax debt. My head spun. I sat down heavily in the chair, staring at the money, then at the shelves of supplies. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a plan. This whole thing, the debt, the foreclosure notice, the offer from Apex, it was a test. He had left me a problem and then hidden a solution, waiting for me to find it. He didn't want me to take the easy way out. He wanted me to come here. He wanted me to look closer. He wanted me to pass the test. Tucked underneath the last bundle of cash was a thick, sealed envelope. My name was written on the front in a strong, slightly spidery script. Leo. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. This was it. The explanation. The reason. I carefully broke the seal and pulled out a sheaf of heavy, cream-colored paper, covered in the same handwriting. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dear Leo," it began. "If you are reading this, it means several things. It means I am gone. It means you did not take the easy path and sell your birthright for a handful of silver. It means you came here, to this place, and you were clever enough, or stubborn enough, to look beneath the surface. It means there is some of my blood in you after all, and for that, I am proud." I had to stop and read that line again. I am proud. 4 words. 4 words I had been waiting my entire life to hear from someone. I felt a thick knot of emotion rise in my throat. I swallowed it down and kept reading. I owe you an explanation. I owe you a lifetime of them. And I am sorry that this letter will have to do. I know you must think of me as the man who abandoned you, the grandfather who let you be swallowed by the system. It is not the truth. The truth is, everything I have done for the past 17 years, I have done to protect you. Protect me? From what? The system was what I needed protection from. Your parents, the letter continued, were good people. Your mother, my beautiful, reckless daughter, had a heart as big as this desert sky. Your father was a charismatic man, a dreamer. But they fell in with the wrong crowd. Not just bad people, Leo. Dangerous people. A criminal organization that dealt in things I will not write about here. They thought they could handle it. They were wrong. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the pages. Criminals. My parents. This was the story no one had ever told me. They tried to get out. They had you, and they wanted a different life. But you don't just walk away from people like that. There was an incident. Your parents disappeared. The people they were involved with believed they had taken something that belonged to them, something valuable. And they believed your parents might have left it with me, or with you. I could feel the cold dread seeping into my bones. This wasn't some distant family drama. This was real. This was my life. I knew they would come looking, for the money, or for you as leverage. I had to make you disappear. I had to make you invisible. I used every cent I had, every contact, to get you into the foster system far away, under a slightly different name, with a file that listed your parents as deceased in a car accident. I had to cut myself off from you completely, so there was no trail to follow. I became a reclusive old man in the desert, poor, alone, with nothing of value. The safest thing I could be for you was a stranger. I had to put the letter down. I stood up and paced the small cellar, my mind reeling. My entire life, the story I had been told, was a lie. A fabrication designed to keep me safe. The abandonment I had felt, the loneliness, the years in the system. It wasn't neglect. It was a shield. A painful, brutal, but necessary shield. My grandfather hadn't thrown me away. He had hidden me. He had sacrificed his relationship with me, his only family, to keep me alive. The trading post wasn't a failure. It was a fortress. The poverty wasn't a misfortune. It was camouflage. I looked at the money in the box. $35,000. Just enough to solve the immediate problem. Just enough to pass the first test. The letter wasn't finished. I picked it up again, my heart pounding. The money in this box is for the taxes. Pay them. Keep this land. It is more important than you know. This is your home now, if you want it. Your fortress. The people your parents tangled with are still out there, but their organization is weaker now. Their memories faded. The danger is less, but it is not zero. Be smart. Be quiet. This trading post is where you can start again, where we can start again in a way. This is your legacy, Leo. Not debt, not dust, a chance. Your first choice is to pay the taxes. Your next choice will be harder. There is more to this story. When you are ready, look to the North Star. Your loving grandfather, Silas. I sat in the cellar for what felt like hours, the lantern light flickering, the letter in my hand. I read it over and over, the words sinking into me like rain into dry earth. My grandfather's voice, a voice I couldn't remember, was suddenly the clearest thing in the world. He hadn't abandoned me. He had saved me. The narrative of my life, the one I had built around being unwanted and discarded, crumbled into dust. It was a painful, disorienting collapse, but in its place, something new and fragile began to grow. A sense of purpose, a sense of belonging. I cried, Not the quiet, choked-off sobs of a foster kid trying not to be heard through a thin bedroom wall. I put my head in my hands and wept, deep, ragged breaths that tore through my chest. I cried for the baby in the photograph who lost his mother. I cried for the boy who grew up believing he was alone. I cried for the grandfather who spent 20 years in self-imposed exile, watching over his grandson from a distance, his heart breaking with every passing year. And I cried with a strange, overwhelming sense of relief. The weight I had been carrying for my entire life, the weight of being a mistake, an inconvenience, was gone. I wasn't a loose end. I was a protected legacy. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where one piece of information, one story, one truth, changes everything you thought you knew about yourself. Where the past you were running from suddenly looks completely different in the rearview mirror. It's a powerful, terrifying, and ultimately liberating feeling. If you've been through something similar, if you've ever had to rebuild your own story from the ground up, I'd be honored if you shared a piece of that in the comments. This community, this space, is built for people who understand that our pasts are complex, and that the truth, when it finally comes, can set you free, even when it hurts. Because you're not alone in that feeling. We've all been there, in one way or another, standing in the ruins of what we thought was true, and deciding what to build next. Eventually, the tears subsided, leaving me hollowed out and calm. The cellar was quiet. The money was on the table. The letter was in my hand. The test. I had passed the first part. I had found the solution. But Silas's letter had said the next choice would be harder. What could be harder than this? I packed the money carefully back into the ammo can. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket, along with the photograph of my mother. I extinguished the lantern, plunging the cellar back into darkness, and climbed the stairs, pulling the heavy trapdoor shut behind me. It settled into place with a solid, reassuring thud. Back in the main room, the afternoon sun was now streaming through the gaps in the boards, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. I felt like a different person than the one who had climbed through the window that morning. The building no longer looked like a ruin to me. It looked like a challenge. It looked like a promise. It looked like home. The immediate problem was the money. I couldn't just walk into the county office with an ammo can full of cash. I needed Ms. Albright. But I had no phone, and Jim wasn't coming back until the next day. I had to wait. Waiting was something I was good at. I'd spent most of my life waiting. For a new placement, for a court date, for my 18th birthday. But this was a different kind of waiting. It wasn't passive. It was active. It was the calm before I made my first real move. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. I found a broom in a back closet and started with the apartment upstairs. I swept away the thickest layers of dust and grime, opened the one window that wasn't boarded up, and let the clean, dry desert air circulate. I found a bucket and a rag and, using water from one of the jugs in the cellar, I wiped down every surface in the small apartment. The table, the chair, the bookshelf. I made the bed, pulling the thin, clean sheets I found in a trunk at the foot of the bed frame taut. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was an act of claiming the space. As I worked, my mind kept replaying the words from the letter. Your next choice will be harder. Look to the North Star. What did it mean? I went back downstairs as the sun began to set, the light outside turning a fiery orange and purple. I stood on the porch, watching the sky change. The trading post was situated with its back to the canyon wall, facing east. The north side of the building was a long, windowless wall. I walked around to it. The wooden siding was just as weathered here as everywhere else. I ran my hands over the rough planks. Nothing. I looked up. The roofline was straight and simple. No strange protrusions, no hidden compartments that I could see. Look to the North Star. Was it a literal instruction? Did I have to wait for nightfall? As darkness fell, the desert came alive with a different kind of silence. The sky, free from the light pollution of any city, was an explosion of stars. I had never seen so many. It was overwhelming. I found the Big Dipper, and from there, Polaris, the North Star. It hung in the sky directly over the northern corner of the building. I stood on that spot, right at the corner, and looked at the wall again. Nothing. I looked down at the foundation. It was made of the same local rock as the fireplace. I knelt, running my hands over the cool stones. And then my fingers found it. A single star, expertly carved into one of the foundation stones, almost invisible in the rough texture of the rock. It was small, no bigger than my thumb. The North Star. I pressed on it. Unlike the stone in the fireplace, this one didn't move. There was no click, no groan of hidden mechanisms. I pushed harder, my frustration mounting. Nothing. I sat back on my heels, confused. Looked to the North Star. I had found the star. What now? Was it just a symbol? A marker? Maybe the clue was inside. I went back inside, lit the other kerosene lamp I'd found in the kitchen, and placed it on the counter. The main room flickered with warm, dancing light. I went to the north wall and began to examine it inch by inch, from the floor to the ceiling. The wall was constructed of long, vertical wooden planks. I ran my hands over them, knocking gently, listening for any hollow sounds. Near the corner, where the star was carved on the outside foundation, one of the planks sounded different. It was a subtle change in pitch, a slightly less solid thud. I knocked again. Definitely hollow. I examined the plank more closely. There were no visible seams, no hinges. It looked exactly like all the others. But Silas was a clever man. He liked old things, things with character. I thought about the trap door, the hidden stone in the fireplace. His secrets weren't obvious. You had to look at things from a different angle. I pressed on the plank. I tried to slide it. Nothing. Frustrated, I leaned against it, my shoulder pressing into the wood right over the hollow spot. And I felt it move. Not in, not up or down. It pivoted. The entire plank, a solid piece of wood 10 feet long, rotated on a hidden central pin. It swung inwards, revealing a dark, narrow opening in the wall. My heart leaped into my throat. Behind the plank was a hidden compartment, a vertical shaft set into the wall. And inside, resting on a small wooden shelf, was another box. This one was different. It was smaller than the first, made of polished cedar, and it was locked not with an iron lock, but with a complex-looking brass combination dial. Next to it, propped up against the side of the compartment, was a thick, leather-bound ledger. I reached in and pulled out the ledger first. The leather was worn smooth with age. I opened it. The pages were filled with my grandfather's neat, precise handwriting. But it wasn't a journal. It was a record. Dates, names, numbers. It looked like a business ledger, but the entries were strange. Coyote, one read, 2 crates, payment received. Another, Whispering Wind, package delivered, full moon. It made no sense. This wasn't a record of pottery and blankets sold. This was something else entirely. I turned my attention to the cedar box. The combination lock had 3 dials, each marked with letters, not numbers. A password. What was the password? I tried my name. L-E-O. Nothing. I tried Silas's name. S-I-L. Nothing. I thought back to the letter. What was important to him? What words did he use? Then I remembered the photograph, the one thing he had saved of my mother. I didn't know her name. No one had ever told me. I flipped through the first few pages of the ledger, my eyes scanning for anything that looked like a woman's name. And then I saw it, on the very first page, an entry dated 25 years ago. A single word, written with more flourish than the others. Lily. I went back to the box. My hands were trembling again. L. I turned the first dial. I. The second. L. The third. I pulled on the latch. With a soft click, it opened. The inside of the box was lined with velvet, and resting on the velvet was not money, not another letter, but a stack of official-looking documents held together with a paperclip. The top one was a geological survey map of the 2 acres of land the trading post sat on. It was covered in notations and symbols I didn't understand. The next was a deed, but it wasn't for the land. It was for water rights. Senior water rights to the Red Rock Aquifer, it read. Perpetual and unassailable. I had no idea what that meant, but it sounded important. Beneath the deed were copies of correspondence, letters between my grandfather and a lawyer, not Ms. Albright, a different one, from years ago. And then I saw the letters from Apex Land Development, not recent ones. These were dated 5, 10, 15 years ago. They had been trying to buy this land from him for a long time. Their offers started low and got progressively, aggressively higher. The last one, dated a year before his death, offered him $500,000 for the property. $500,000. And he had turned it down. He had chosen to live in near poverty, to let the building fall into disrepair, to accumulate a massive tax debt rather than sell. Why? The last document in the stack was a single sheet of paper. It was a chemical analysis report from a laboratory. It listed mineral contents from water samples, lithium, boron, and in concentrations the report described as exceptionally high, a mineral I'd never heard of. My grandfather had circled it in red ink. He knew. He knew what was under this land. The water rights weren't just for water. The aquifer that ran beneath his property, beneath my property, was rich with some of the most sought-after minerals on the planet. Apex didn't want the land for a housing development. They wanted what was underneath it. And they had been trying to get it for years, trying to squeeze the old man who wouldn't sell. The tax debt, the foreclosure, it was their final move. They had waited for him to die, thinking his heir, some ignorant kid from the system, would be an easy mark. They thought I would see a ruin and a pile of debt and sell it all for a measly $5,000. They were about to be very disappointed. The next morning, I was waiting on the porch when Jim's truck appeared on the horizon, a plume of dust in its wake. I had the ammo can with the money in one hand and the cedar box in the other. When he pulled up, I climbed into the passenger seat. He glanced at the boxes. "Looks like you made a decision." "I did," I said. "Take me to Ms. Albright's office." When I walked into Evelyn Albright's office, she looked up from her desk with an expression of mild surprise. She had clearly expected me to call her for a ride, broken and defeated. She hadn't expected me to show up on her doorstep, looking determined. "Leo," she said, her eyebrows raising slightly. "I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon." "I found a ride," I said, placing the ammunition can on her polished wooden desk. It landed with a heavy, solid thud. "And I found this." I opened the can and showed her the bundles of cash. Her professional composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she was speechless. "My God," she whispered. "Where did you find this?" "He left it for me," I said simply. "It's for the taxes. I want to pay them. Today." She stared at the money, then at me. The look in her eyes changed from surprise to a dawning respect. "Silas," she murmured, shaking her head with a small, wry smile. "You magnificent, stubborn old fool." She spent the next hour making calls, her voice crisp and efficient again, but with a new energy. She called the county tax assessor's office. She arranged for the cash to be deposited and converted into a cashier's check. There was a sense of excitement in her movements, the thrill of a fight she hadn't expected to have. While she was on the phone, I opened the cedar box and laid the documents out on her desk. The deed to the water rights, the geological survey, the letters from Apex, the mineral report. When she hung up the phone, she came over and looked at the papers. She picked up the water rights deed first, her expression growing more and more serious. "Leo, do you know what this is?" "I have an idea," I said. "It's not just water, is it?" "No," she said, her voice low. "It's not just water. In this part of the country, senior water rights like these are rarer than gold. And with these mineral concentrations—" She trailed off, looking at the report. Apex wasn't trying to buy a plot of land. They were trying to buy a mine. She looked me straight in the eye. "Silas didn't just leave you a home. He left you a kingdom, and a war to go with it." The picture was finally complete. The danger my parents had been in, the reason my grandfather had hidden me, the long-running battle with Apex, the elaborate test he had set up for me. It all clicked into place. He hadn't just wanted to see if I was smart enough to find the money. He wanted to see if I was strong enough to take up the fight. He was giving me a choice. I could pay the taxes, live quietly in the trading post, and be left alone. Or I could use what he had left me, the evidence, the land, the rights, and fight back. Not just for the money, but for him. For the 20 years he spent alone protecting me. For the legacy he had so carefully preserved. "What happens now?" I asked her. "Now," she said, a fierce glint in her eyes, "we go on the offensive. This," she tapped the stack of old letters from Apex, "is evidence of a pattern of predatory behavior. This," she tapped the new, lowball offer, "is a bad faith offer made with the knowledge of the land's true value. They thought you were an easy target. We are going to show them how wrong they were." She made another call, this time to the main number for Apex Land Development. "Yes, I'd like to speak to whoever is in charge of the Blackwood property acquisition," she said, her voice like ice. She was put on hold. After a minute, a man's voice came on the line. I could hear his slick, corporate tone even from across the desk. Ms. Albright put him on speakerphone. "This is Evelyn Albright," she said. "I am the attorney for the estate of Silas Blackwood and its heir, Leo Vance." "Ah, Ms. Albright," the voice said smoothly. "I was hoping to hear from you. Have you and your client decided to accept our generous offer?" "We have considered your offer," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "and we are formally rejecting it. We are also aware of the senior water rights attached to the property and the lithium and boron concentrations in the aquifer. Any future communication you wish to have with my client will be in the form of a formal offer that reflects the land's actual value, which we currently estimate to be in the 8-figure range. and I would advise you to make that offer quickly, as we are also considering filing a lawsuit against your company for predatory acquisition tactics. Do I make myself clear?" There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. The slick corporate voice was gone, replaced by a sputtering, indignant sound. "Now, wait a minute. You can't." "I believe I can," Ms. Albright said, and she hung up the phone. She looked at me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Welcome to the fight, Leo." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Ms. Albright was a force of nature. She hired a top geological consulting firm to conduct a new official survey of the land, confirming my grandfather's findings and then some. The value of the minerals under my 2 acres was staggering. She filed the paperwork to pay off the tax debt, securing my ownership of the property. And she began drafting the lawsuit against Apex. I moved into the small apartment above the trading post. I spent my days working on the building, clearing out the decades of dust and junk. I repaired the collapsed porch roof, replaced the broken windows, and gave the entire exterior a fresh coat of paint. It was hard, physical work, but I loved it. Every nail I hammered, every board I replaced, felt like I was healing a part of myself. I was rebuilding my home, and in doing so, I was rebuilding my life. I also spent hours reading my grandfather's ledger. It wasn't a criminal record, it was the opposite. Coyote and Whispering Wind weren't code names for criminals. They were names of local Navajo people. Silas had been using the trading post as a quiet, unofficial hub for the community. A place where people could trade goods, get supplies on credit, or find help when they needed it. He was a lifeline for people, a silent guardian. The ledger was a record of his kindness, a map of the community he had secretly supported. The town of Red Rock began to change its opinion of me. I was no longer just Silas's boy. I was the kid who was fixing up the old Blackwood place. People would stop by. The old man from the mercantile dropped off a case of cold drinks one hot afternoon. Jim, the taxi driver, came by with a couple of his friends and helped me hoist the new beams for the porch roof into place. They didn't ask for anything in return. They just showed up. They were my grandfather's friends, and now they were becoming mine. I was finding my own community, one act of kindness at a time. The fight with Apex was long and ugly. They tried to intimidate me, sending lawyers and threatening letters. But with Ms. Albright by my side, I never wavered. We had the truth, and we had the proof. In the end, they didn't want a public lawsuit. They didn't want the story of how they tried to swindle a dead man's orphan heir out of a fortune to become public knowledge. They settled. The final number was large enough to ensure I would never have to worry about money again. But the money wasn't the point. It never was. The point was the trading post. The point was the legacy. The point was the choice. I could have taken the settlement and walked away, a rich man. I could have sold the land to the highest bidder and moved to a city, to a life of ease. But that would have been a betrayal of everything my grandfather stood for. He didn't save this place for me so I could sell it. He saved it for me so I could continue his work. So I made my final choice. I took a portion of the settlement money and invested it. Not in stocks or bonds. I invested it in this place. I fully restored the trading post, not as a tourist trap, but as what it was always meant to be, a real, functioning heart of the community. The shelves are stocked again. The fireplace roars in the winter. The kitchen serves hot coffee and fresh stew. I reopened the trading business, working with the local Navajo artisans, the descendants of the names in my grandfather's ledger, ensuring they get a fair price for their incredible work. I used the rest of the money to establish a foundation in my grandfather's name. The Silas Blackwood Foundation provides educational scholarships for kids in the county and emergency funds for families in need. It's his legacy made real. The steel door in the back room is gone. It's now the entrance to a free legal aid clinic that Ms. Albright runs twice a month. The cellar is no longer a survival bunker. It's a food pantry. This place is no longer a fortress built for one. It's a sanctuary built for many. I found more of my grandfather's journals. I learned about his life, his love for my grandmother, his grief over losing my mother. I learned that he was a scholar, a quiet intellectual who loved the desert and its history. I feel like I know him now. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the trading post late at night, I can almost feel his presence, a quiet, approving silence. My life isn't a fairy tale. The scars from my childhood are still there. They always will be. But they are a part of my story, not the whole story. I was the boy who was kicked out, the boy who was abandoned. But I was also the boy who was protected, the boy who was given a second chance. And I chose to take it. This place, this dusty trading post at the edge of nowhere, taught me everything. It taught me that inheritance isn't about money. It's about the stories we carry and the choices we make. It taught me that home isn't a building you own. It's a community you build. It's the feeling of knowing you belong somewhere, that you are a part of something larger than yourself. It's about finding your purpose, not in what you can get, but in what you can give. And that's a lesson worth more than all the lithium in the world. So I want to ask you, what does home mean to you? What is the legacy you want to build? It doesn't have to be a building or a business. It can be in the kindness you show, the community you nurture, the story you choose to live. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one, because every story matters. And if this story resonated with you, if you believe in second chances and the power of finding where you belong, please subscribe and become a part of this community. Because we all have a story to tell. We just need to be brave enough to live it.